Hello, today we are going to talk about suicide prevention at the worksite. My name is Barb Carr and I'm here with Justin Clark. Welcome.
Hello.
And we will have Alex Paradies join us as well. I want to start out talking about a series I wrote for the Taproot Root Cause Analysis blog on suicide prevention. So I did a 3-part series, and the first article in the series was about creating a psychologically safe workplace. So that's kind of a buzzword that we've heard a lot over the past few years, psychological safety. And it's not as broad as a topic as it's kind of been made into. But when we're talking about psychological safety, we're talking about giving our workers a feeling of inclusion and fostering respect in the workplace. So I touch a little bit on that, but I also include a much broader topic of psychological well-being in general, because we know, especially from what we've been through the past few years, that that's a hot topic, and that's mental health is something that we really need to think about for our employees. The second article that I did in the series is about identifying and assisting workers who may be at risk. So that's not really an easy thing. For one, workers are protected by ADA and by HIPAA from giving us confidential medical information. So you really have to think about approaching someone, a worker who you think is contemplating suicide, in a very sensitive way. And not only that, but just providing them resources in the workplace. I know I had a personal experience a few years ago where a friend was contemplating suicide, and someone who is contemplating suicide, they don't have the energy to look for those resources or make those calls. And I called maybe 15 or 16 therapists trying to get him connected with one before I found one that his insurance would accept and that he could afford to see. So that's something that we have to think about as employers. Do we have resource sheets that talk about what mental health resources are available? What's covered, what's not covered? Are there any groups in the community that they can go to for help? These are things that are really important that sometimes we overlook, and we just focus in on physical health when mental health is should be a priority as well. And then finally, the last article in the series was about responding to and investigating a possible suicide. So Justin, we work with a lot of people in high risk, high consequence jobs, and one of the things about someone who has suicidal ideation is a means to do that. So here we have workers who are working in very hazardous situations, and who knows what the real numbers are on fatalities that happen at the worksite. So it's something that if you're investigating, you have to be very insensitive to it, but you also have to really collect the facts on any kind of fatality, even if you think that it is a possible suicide, because there's just so many factors to think about, and you don't want to introduce your bias. You really want to collect a lot of factual information and get those problems solved. And you may have problems to solve that aren't like another type of fatality, like is there bullying at the workplace, anything that would affect someone's mental health that you would want to implement corrective actions on immediately, because when there's one suicide at a work site or anywhere, there's a lot more ideation among the people in the community. That kind of is a factor that influences people. So there's a lot to think about in responding to a possible suicide, not just investigation-wise, but how you are communicating with the other workers, how you are supporting the workers who knew the deceased worker. And I hope that you'll take a look at the series. It is on the Taproot Root Cause Analysis blog, and we'll provide links to that. I'd like to have Justin talk to us a minute now. He has actually some training on how to respond to someone who maybe have suicidal ideation. Can you take that?
Yep, and the way you explain it is exactly right. There's many factors that can play into it, and integral and key to the whole process is understanding the mental space that somebody is in when they might be having suicidal ideations. And that's really the first step towards dealing with any situation, whether or not a suicide has already occurred, or a possible suicide has already occurred, maybe if you're investigating it. But key is to understand where somebody is at when they start contemplating this course of action. And one of the best ways to think about it is that nobody particularly wants to die, but they feel like there is no other way to get the pain to end. They feel like that's their only course of option, and they're almost constrained to taking that route. And so the first thing, we're going to talk a little bit about how to respond in situation, but really just understand the mentality behind it and where somebody is at. So it is absolutely key to understand and be aware of some of the signs that somebody might be contemplating something like this. You know, we've all kind of have at least a peripheral understanding, and there's quite a bit of prolific discussions now that may talk about some of the signs and symptoms, but things like is starting to withdraw from their social relationships, maybe start giving some of their personal possessions away, maybe starting to look at really aggressively pursuing, finalizing projects that have hung around for a while, you know, getting to a point where they feel like their affairs are in order. But then, you know, displaying certain aggravations or, you know, really uncharacteristic personality changes. Saying specific words like they're hopeless or they feel like nothing is ever going to change. Things that indicate that, you know, they feel like a situation is hopeless, or they feel like there is nothing that they can do to better their life. So that's some of the signs and symptoms. And then immediately in situation, they might either specifically say that, you know, the world would be better off without me, or nobody would miss me if I were to disappear or if I were to leave. These are other words that people might be saying when they're in this frame of mind. And so these are things to be aware of, and that if you come across, it's really important to have kind of work through on your own a response that you would have to it, because a lot of us, if we would come across something like that, if we would come across somebody talking like this, it would freak us out, and it would catch us off guard, and it would fluster us, and we could freeze. So it's really important to have an understanding and awareness of the mentality that somebody's in when they're expressing these kind of things, and how to specifically respond to it such that maybe you don't meet every person's need, but you can respond in situation to where you can keep them safe for now. And that is one of the key concepts. And you know, if you come across anything like this, being able to respond to another human being that is experiencing this type of crisis or hopelessness. So, you know, there is absolutely nothing wrong with, and this is the right course of action, if you come across somebody that you even suspect might have these kind of ideations, asking them the very direct and specific question, are you contemplating suicide? And if they answer no, then you can start developing, you know, one, determine if they're, you know, maybe telling you the truth and dig a little bit, you know, keep asking questions. But if they say yes, then, you know, you can start talking to them about the specific space that they're in. And coming back to that point of, you know, if they are considering this thing, asking them the specific question again, do you have a plan to hurt yourself, or do you intend to hurt yourself? And then this is a weird thing in human psychology, that a lot of times these things within ourselves we don't realize. And so if you can bring them to the point where they recognize and can admit that this is something that's going on, then that's, you know, a little bit more out in the open, and you can discuss it and help work at it with them. But if, you know, if they are much closer to a crisis situation, where if they do have a plan, they do have these ideations, and they're imminently going to carry it out, the most important thing to communicate to them is something like, I understand that you feel like there is no hope, and there is this is your only option. I understand that you want this pain to end. But what if we put off this decision just for a little bit? And would you be willing to at least delay this decision and talk with me for a little bit and stay safe for now? And that's the first step. That is the first major step and turning point in the conversation with a person that might be experiencing this kind of these kinds of feelings, or they're considering this kind of action. This is the first thing that's going to at least extend the amount of time that you and your support systems have to take care of this person. Because once they agree with you, once you form that course of action or that contract with that person, then you can start moving forward to getting them to the resources they need. Most of us that come across something like this aren't professionals. We don't have an entire career worth of training to be able to really respond in depth. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't do any of these things, but I can direct this person to resources that can help them. And I can respond in a really human way to take care of this person in the moment, such that I can at least guide them towards not taking this, worst case course of action. Sure. And so there are many, many resources out there, and we'll put it in the show notes, but the best thing that you can do, if you have no other, connections, or if, you don't have numbers to 15 therapists to call, right. One of the best things you can do is call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and we'll put that number in the show notes. These are people that are absolutely trained and able to respond in crisis situations. And I know quite a few people that, even if they're not at that major life crisis moment, you can call this number and you can just express what's going on. Mm-hmm. That is a dedicated human being who will just listen to you and will talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. And so even if you don't have insurance and you don't have a therapist and you don't have any of these established psychotherapy type of individuals, I know from personal experience that it takes, sometimes upwards of a year to get an appointment even. This is a resource that's immediately available that you can take advantage of, that is absolutely free, and you can just even go explore scary feelings. Sure. And it doesn't have to be that crisis moment. It can just be a conversation with another human being, particularly because if it's not something viable to talk to somebody in your social circle, because that can be a huge barrier to getting help, is that, if you were to say talk to somebody at work, then there might be a whole bunch of company policies that get activated, and depending on how that goes, it could end up generating just a lot of, whether it be paperwork or churn or social kickback, whatever it is. People have stigmas about these things, but being able to call somebody completely outside of your life, not in your social connections, is really powerful, to be able to just communicate it to another human being without really essentially anybody else knowing. It's a 100% confidentiality type of stuff. So there's a first huge resource. And then, that's just broad strokes, first responder type of ideas that it's good to think about, and it's good to work through how would I respond to somebody in this situation. I find it's pretty rare to talk to anybody who hasn't come across, either firsthand or secondhand at the very most, situations where somebody is contemplating suicide, and situations where somebody at least has these feelings, and a lot of us have experienced that type of feeling ourselves. And so it's really good to know and to work through, here are resources that we have, and here is the mental grooves that we can fall into a lot of times when we just go through these experiences in the modern world that bring us towards a place of hopelessness. But understanding that you can take care of somebody in that space, and while they might be feeling hopeless, the situation is not hopeless. And there are many things that we can do and specific steps that we can take in situations that can lead towards a place of hope and restoring an ability to look towards the future.
Absolutely. I really appreciate everything you had to say, especially when you're talking to someone at the worksite and just letting them know, can you just give it a little bit of time, because from my research, and I understand that the hopelessness that you were talking about and the extreme pain that someone is in, that sometimes we can say things that are insensitive, but we don't really recognize how insensitive we are. Like, oh, better days are ahead, or they can't see that far ahead, you know, or it could be worse, or let me tell you what happened to me once, you know. And people say this not to be mean, but because they don't know what to say. But the advice you gave today of just telling them, can you just give it a little bit of time? Let's try to figure something out. You know, you're not asking them to look ahead at brighter days, but we're going to take this minute right now and regroup a little bit. Just give it a little bit more time. I think that's just really valuable advice.
Yep, and there's absolutely a time for those types of words. Yeah. But in situation, there's a very particular need and a care that needs to be expressed and properly provided for this person who's going through a crisis. And a lot of our initial reaction to this type of thing is to want to empathize with a person. But this is a situation that is definitely outside of the normal bounds of human experience, and it's not right in that moment. It may not be the best time to try to empathize with a person, because really what they're contemplating right now is they've are on the cusp of or have already made the decision that they're going to carry out this action, and the first important step is to get them to at least delay that decision. So human empathy is something that's probably been missing along the way a lot of times. I just saw a short video the other day of a guy a guy that had analyzed a lot of the tragic suicides that had occurred off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he said he had gotten very numb to it, these investigations, because he had done so many of them. But there was one letter that was, one suicide note that he had found that was left by a person who did end up following through with it, tragically. And he said this note was essentially said, I'm going to walk to the Golden Gate Bridge and carry out this plan. But if any single solitary person along the way stops me and says hi, I'll turn around and come home. Wow. And so there's absolutely a place for human empathy. There is absolutely a place for human interaction and just taking care of each other and asking that question, hey, how are you doing? And how have you been doing lately? Yeah. I've noticed that you're not talking as much as you did, or you're not interacting as much as you did, or maybe you're interacting a whole bunch more. It can go, personality changes can go either way before this type of thing. So just like digging in a little bit deeper, if you have kind of that intuitive sense that something may be going on. And even if it's not, everybody likes to be talked to and ask questions about how they're doing. Sure. And, even if they're not really receptive to it, they at least know that somebody's willing to get up in their business and really cares about them. And cares enough to ask the questions and not accept just I'm doing fine and move on with your life. Not just the standard American greeting of, oh, hey, how you doing today? That doesn't mean anything, but, really taking an interest in the people around you and caring for it. And that's part of the prevention, and how we can take care of each other so that we can help prevent things like this and help take care of people so that they don't get to these points where they feel like it's hopeless and nobody cares.
Right. And I think, we'll just touch on what you said, that listening is more important than what the words you have to say, though.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Justin. You provided some really valuable insight today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here.
I'm here with Alex Paradies, and he has an experience that might give us some insight on how to get better at suicide prevention at our workplaces. Alex?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, I actually had an instance where I had to have a conversation with an employee who was contemplating suicide. So it came about, and I found out about it. I ran I managed an area that had about 110 people across 4 shifts, 24/7. So they were working on rotating shifts, and he was on night shift, but he had a lot of buddies because he had been trained on first shift. And I would get in pretty early in the morning, most mornings. And one of the mornings that I got in, one of his buddies came over to me, and he said, "Hey, he was very brave," which I feel for anybody that's willing to step up for a friend and be brave for them. But he said, "Hey, I'm worried about this person. They're going through a lot of problems, and I think they're thinking about committing suicide tonight. He's just been off all day. He's been acting a straight way. He's talking really strange. Can you talk to him?" And so I was in the morning, and I said, "Okay, I'll go grab him right now." And I went and grabbed him, and I brought him in my office. And I remember him sitting down, and he seemed you definitely could tell there was something on his mind. And I said, "Hey, this is where you have to be brave, right? Because this is an awkward conversation. How do you start a conversation with, 'Hey, I hear you're thinking about committing suicide'?"
Yeah.
You can't just do it that way. And so as managers, we have to demonstrate our care, and that means we have to be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. And so I had to bring it up, and I said, "Hey, I brought you in here because your friends are concerned." And I think that was the way to start it off, is your friends are concerned.
Yeah.
I'm concerned, I'm your boss, we're friends,
Sure.
but your friends, the guys you hang out with, the ones that care for your well-being, they're concerned. So I said, "They're concerned. I hear you're going through some things. Do you want to talk about it? Let's talk about it." I don't think I gave him the choice. I said, "Let's talk about it," I think. And he was willing to, and we discussed. He was going through some relationship issues with his longer-term girlfriend, and they were separating, and that was causing some emotional strain. Now, you can see that in people's work. As a manager, you might look for those kind of signs, when are people going through those emotional periods? How is it, notice it when they're affecting their work and their behavior and their mood. And maybe you can find those opportunities, but he had brought it up. And as he talked at the end, I brought it up, and I went to the point then, as are you experiencing, are you thinking about suicide? And he said he's been thinking about it.
Wow.
And that was something that, to me, it was my first time having a conversation like that with a person. And I was fortunate that our company that we work for had a free calling number that the company paid for, so that employees could call to have a conversation with a therapist. It was virtual, it was a phone one, but it was a number. I didn't know that number, didn't have that memorized.
Right.
Who would have that
Right.
memorized? But I knew that we had the resource. So I said, "I understand this. I want you to make a promise to me. I'm going to get this number. I'm going to message you," because he's going to go home. It's his shift.
Yeah.
"I'm going to message you this number. You got to promise me you're going to call this number today. And we'll talk next when you come back on shift the next night. We'll talk tomorrow. But you got to promise me you're going to call that." Now that's a good news, because I got the number immediately when HR got in that morning and was able to get that to him. But it meant we made a deal. We made a deal. It wasn't go home and, all right, I'm going to go have a couple drinks and think about my situation. It was a deal of, well, Alex is going to send me a resource, and I told him I'd call it, so I'll do that, because he was a man of his word, and he was a tough guy. And so, just like Justin was saying earlier, the idea that delay it a little bit. Can we delay it? What's it going to, that delay can make all the difference for people.
Yeah.
So he ended up, I got him the number, and he called it, but it was just such a surreal experience. I haven't had a grown man in tears in my office before. And I think as managers and as bosses and as safety people, as people that want to demonstrate their care for people, that's what we do in leadership. Is we're stewards of our employees. And so, as that, we have to be mindful of these things, and we have to be willing to reach out and have those conversations. Because if I didn't have that conversation with him that night, maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have, but we don't know, and we want to make sure that we take every opportunity to make sure our people are in the best mindset and they have the resources they need to be successful. So I think as managers, we have to look for those signs. We have to present ourselves in a way that employees are willing to come to us. If I wasn't, at least didn't demonstrate and treat people with dignity and respect like I did when I was a manager, then I don't know that the operator would have come to me with the problem.
Right.
Maybe they would have come to one of our supervisors. Maybe they would have come to HR. Maybe they would have gone to someone else, but I don't know that. And so I felt very trusted because of that. That's one of those, you feel at least that some people are comfortable enough that they're going to bring a concern. So we have to kind of demonstrate ourselves in a way that people are going to feel comfortable bringing it up. We have to be respectful of people. And like I said, I didn't tell him any answers. There's nothing that I said to him, and I don't remember all the words that we discussed, but there's nothing I said to him that I feel was profound or was going to help him with his situation. I can't give good relationship advice. I wasn't going to help with any of those things or make him feel better. But what I could do was listen, and what I could do was make sure that he knew the resources and knew that his friends cared, I cared, and that we expected to see him the next day. That was the so I could do that. And I think sometimes, we imagine these situations would happen and it's us with a megaphone talking a guy off a ledge. But I don't think that that's really what it takes from us.
Right.
I think all it really takes from us is knowing the resources that we can give, being open with people enough to be willing to have these conversations, and being courageous enough to listen and communicate with people and treat them with the dignity and respect they deserve. And so I think that's what we should take away. And I really enjoyed, your blog series on this. And so I felt like it was needed to share, because I doubt I'm the only supervisor or manager that's had that situation.
Oh, I'm sure not. Yeah.
And, when we look at what's happening right now culturally, we have so many people coming out of 2020, 2021 that are unbelievably stressed. We're in these strained emotional states. Our nerves are very sensitive, right? So that emotional strain is there and present, and we have to make sure that we're mindful of that in our people, especially when we're undermanned, working long hours, on the off shift. We're in those situations. I think everybody has some sort of personal connection to someone that's contemplated or committed suicide. It's tragically common in our society, and I think if we spend that time, Justin's comment of a little bit of decency to each other, a little bit of friendliness and being open with each other, I think can go a long way in helping people.
Absolutely. And what I heard when I was researching, I heard it from Justin and I heard it from you, is you have to be brave enough to ask that hard question, are you thinking about suicide? That's a hard question to ask. And the thing that stood out about your experience to me was you didn't tell the worker, okay, well, when HR opens, you need to go down there because they have a phone number that you can get, but you actually took the step, and you might not thought it was a big step, but that's a huge step, to give him directly that number and say, hey, you need to call this tonight, and then I'll see you tomorrow. So you gave a plan. So important. It's been a hard topic for me to write about and research. It's a heavy subject, but it's so important. And we wanted to bring what we found, the resources that we found, and our experiences to you to help you also think about how to prevent suicide at your workplace. So thanks for joining us, Alex. Did you have any?
Yeah, and like I said, check in with your HR, check in with your companies. They might have a resource like that you should be aware of, that you should make your people aware of.
Absolutely.
And you know, this is something that is really near and dear to my heart, and I think other people's as well. So, you know, I appreciate you guys, you know, writing the article, and everybody that listened. I appreciate you guys. If you have your own stories, share them in the comments, or go to Barb's article and share them there. Because I think the more we talk about, you know, what we've dealt with, what we've shared with people, I think the more awareness we bring about this topic.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for joining us.